Hello everyone, back tuning into today's video. Running very late with today's video, sorry about that. We're going to be having a look at the weather next week, 10 days. We'll also have a look at the CFS V2 for the next month. That takes us well into February. And of course, we'll start by looking at developments in the stratosphere with this stratospheric warming that's coming up at the end of the week and into weekend. But before I get on with all of that, just say about the ads. This link's right on the page. Have a browse through, visit the click through link. It's going to help us page website. And thanks very much for doing that. It's still on course with stratospheric warming with GFX, so I won't show you that. Won't use Meteor Seal today. Still very much on course to warm up a lot in the stratosphere over North Pole. Next at the end of this week through the weekend and start of next week. I'm going to show the E7WF because we are going to get the warming at 10 HPA, which is the top level of the stratosphere. But we've got to see whether this is coming down into the lower levels, whether it's forecast to go down into the lower levels. And we can do that by having a look at the stratosphere diagnostic page at University of Berlin. So this is the chart for the ECMWF forecast for the stratospheric temperatures over North Pole at 10 HPA on the 29th of January. When you see we've got these red colours penetrating into the pole, that cross just there is the actual North Pole. And quite clearly 10 HPA, we've got a big warming taking place. We move through to the 30th of January, and again you see that those bright orange red colours are in there over the pole. So again, temperature is very high, somewhere on this sort of scale in terms of those stratospheric temperatures at 10 HPA. And then we go through to the 31st of January, where we keep the warming going. So it's several days of quite warm temperatures at 10 HPA. Certainly a stratospheric warming. Not sure whether it quite meets the criteria of a sudden stratospheric warming, but certainly at 10 HPA, this is a big warming event taking place in the stratosphere over the North Pole. But what about lower down? What about going to 30 HPA, which is at a slightly lower level in the stratosphere, getting closer towards the troposphere? We've got to start seeing signs of warming getting down into 30 HPA before we can say this is going to affect the weather. So here we are again on the 31st of January. We find a much colder looking picture at that point. There's the cross again over North Pole, and the temperatures look much colder. There's no real sign of a stratospheric warming taking place at 30 HPA. I have got a bit of warmth around here, but generally, temperatures are a lot colder at 30 HPA on the 31st of January compared to 10 HPA. And then go through to the 1st of February, by which time you'd expect the warmth to be starting to push down into the lower levels. And we do see some warming appearing. The temperatures are lifting up. The colours are going richer. But nothing as dramatic as what's happening at 10 HPA. So, yes, a bit of warming does occur at 30 HPA, but nowhere near to the same extent as what we're looking at 10 HPA. And then we go through to the day 10 chart, which is the 2nd of February. And yes, we do again have some warming at 30 HPA, but you notice it's a lot less intense. It's a lot less, it's a lot smaller in terms of its general scope over the North Pole compared to what we're looking at 10 HPA. So that's how we finish up at 30 HPA, those stratospheric temperatures. If we go back to 10 HPA on the 31st January, looks much warmer, doesn't it? The colours are much brighter, they're much more expansive in terms of the area of the North Pole that those bright colours are covering compared to what we see at 30 HPA. That looks a little bit mediocre, really, at 30 HPA. So the impacts of this warming, we are going to get the warming. I don't think it'll meet a sudden stratospheric warming, but we are going to get a major warming occurring at the top level of the stratosphere at 10 HPA over the North Pole. That's going to happen. But whether we move this down to the lower levels of the atmosphere enough to actually impact the troposphere, and that's the layer of the atmosphere where weather is taking place, I'm getting a bit dubious about it. You would want to see, I think at 30 HPA, you want to see the colours getting more intense than they are and covering a bigger area. Nevertheless, this is a big warming that's coming up at 10 HPA, and its impact might be felt as we get through into February. But I think we do need to keep a bit of caution about it at this stage, just how much impact it's going to have. So that's the latest on the warming. I'll keep you posted on that over the next few days, honestly. Interesting situation coming up on Thursday, actually, before I get on with the next week, 10 days. Interesting situation on Thursday, because we're going to be in a southerly wind on Thursday, but unusually it's a cold wind. There's a lot of cold air down across France. So although the wind is coming up from the south there on Thursday, that's a really bitterly cold southerly wind coming out of France. Look how warm the upper air temperatures look. You would look at that and think maybe a little bit of a taste of spring going on there on Thursday. But the dew points are telling the tale. Look how cold it is across France, most parts of Europe, and that southerly wind is bringing this low level, not in the upper atmosphere, but low level down on the surface, frozen continental air across the country. So, despite the fact that we've got warm upper air temperatures and a southerly wind, the actual temperature on Thursday for eastern parts of the country, anyway, is barely getting above freezing, and it'll feel a lot colder than that in that wind. Going to feel sub-zero on Thursday, perhaps the coldest feeling day of the winter that we've had so far. It really will be a bitter wind, that southerly wind that we've got on Thursday. This is a classic example of an inversion. So it's warmer aloft, the upper air temperatures look nice and mild. Down on the surface, much, much colder. And that's quite unusual with a strong wind as well, because normally a strong wind will stir up the atmosphere and you'll mix things up, and those warmer upper air temperatures will come down to the surface. So it is quite unusual for a strong wind to have an inversion, but that's definitely what's going on Thursday. Warm aloft, but really cold and bitter wind down on the surface. We go through to Friday, though, and things are going to start to turn milder. So we bring this weather system in off the Atlantic, starting to turn the flow into an Atlantic flow, and that will start to cut off that bitterly cold southerly. Upper air temperatures have actually lowered a little bit on Friday, quite interestingly. It's a little bit cooler in terms of the upper air temperature, but notice the dew points are going above freezing, particularly for England and Wales. So that's just a sign that we're mixing up the air really on Friday and starting to get more kind of Atlantic influence. So despite the fact the upper air temperature is actually a little bit lower on Friday, the actual temperature is going to be a little bit higher. So it'll be around, in the north, we're going to be around 2 to 4. In the south, probably around 4 to 7, something like that. It is turning much milder down across the southwest. And that will be the trend then as we go through into the weekend. We start to turn it milder off the Atlantic Ocean. But just throw back, because it's quite unusual what's happening there on Thursday. Coming back to weather next week to 10 days, we've got the ECWF here on the top, the GFS, have a look at it in a moment. It's on the bottom, 500 millibars, 8,000 feet. Is an area in the atmosphere, high pressure, low pressure beam and by jet stream running above. ECWF has gone off on a bit of a tangent. Look at all this orange that we've got here to the north of the northeast of us as we go through to around 10 days away. This takes us to around the 4th of February. Got quite a lot of high pressure up there. We've got this deep trough in the Atlantic, so it looks unsettled. It will be very unsettled if that comes off, but the jet stream is going on a bit of a southerly track, and it wouldn't take much actually for this ridge that's up to the northeast to start to pull in easy winds. However, I'm not sure how well supported that is, and the GFS looks very different. Nowhere near as much high pressure to the north of the east. It's just parking a trough of low pressure over and to the west of us with a strong jet stream. Again, on a little bit of a southerly track, but tight lines there, more or less to the south and west of us. But it is a lot milder, the GFS, and much more unsettled as well. It'd be really wet, actually, with that trough through the first week of February, if that came off. So a little bit of a split there between the GFS and the ECMWF. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles the next 2 weeks. The red line here is 30-year temperature average. Still just about cold on average now. Then we're going to go mild on average at the end of the week. We know that's associated with that bitterly cold southerly wind, though, so it won't be anywhere near as mild as those upper air temperatures would suggest. Then at this point into the weekend, where it's actually turning a little bit cooler in terms of the upper air temperatures, temperatures on the surface will be lifting up. So a really odd sort of spell at the end of the week and into the weekend. The upshot, though, so to get through into next week, which is this part of the ensemble just here, it's looking milder than average, and it's also looking much wetter as well. Still, few days of really dry weather to come up to the weekend, but that's running out of road now. You notice that is looking very much in the sort of minimum part of the graph now. There isn't much dry weather coming up, and really from beyond this point just here, it does look very wet. So from the weekend onwards, looks like the Atlantic is really coming back in, and this drier period just here at the start does look really quite isolated in terms of the overall ensemble trend. So essentially for the end of January, start of February, still the idea for GFS, but it's looking mild and wet through that first week. Temperature anomaly is looking like this for next week. It's taking us from the 24th of January today through the 1st of February. It's a little bit colder than average in the east, a little bit milder than average in the west. Expect these to be trending milder over the next few days. Notice France is beginning to lift up out of the freeze. It's still very cold in the east and the southeast of Europe. The precipitation anomaly. So it's a little bit drier than average for Scotland, much closer to average elsewhere. Expect these to trend wetter over the next few days. Here's the GFS for the weekend, and we're bringing that Atlantic flow in. We've lost that bitterly cold southerly wind that we had on Thursday into Friday, bringing in westerlies. So that looks unsettled with showery rain. It stays unsettled into Sunday as well. Low pressure driving in off the Atlantic, turning wet and windy. Looks very unsettled there on Tuesday, 31st of January, a week away. Really deep area of low pressure, bringing heavy rain, potentially, excuse me, gale force winds to the south of the country as well. And then we're going to start of February. Looks really unsettled, deep area of low pressure rattling in across the country. This one's on a little bit of a southerly track. However, there's no real high pressure up here to drive down cold air. So it's not especially cold. It's just taking the rain on a slightly more southerly track. But the overall idea from the GFS today is really unsettled through the first few days of February. The ECWF, as we know, is rather different. This is how we look on Saturday. Again, we're bringing the Atlantic in. Bit of a slow old process, but the Atlantic is coming in there over the weekend, turning things milder with the flow moving in from the west. Now, we're having a go at building a little bit of high pressure just there to the north of us on Monday. And actually, the ECWF starts to develop that a little bit more on Tuesday. So it starts to build a ridge, or attempts to build a ridge over Scandinavia, which is beginning to delay the progress of these areas of low pressure, with a jet stream doing something a little bit like that. So that's still fairly cool, actually, for the start of next week. Low pressure is coming in off the Atlantic again through the middle part of next week. That looks quite wet. That's that deep area of low pressure going on a southerly track that the GFS is picking up on for the end of next week. The difference is that heights are much higher up over Scandinavia. So we actually finish up on day 10, which is Friday, 3rd of February, looking like this, and very close to pulling in a cold easty wind. We saw it on the height anomaly. There's a lot more high pressure up here than the GFS has got, with the low pressure going down here. Now, this might be partly, at least, to do with that stratospheric warming that's occurring at 10 HPA. But we have seen this from the ECWF quite a bit this winter, but it's been trying to raise heights over Scandinavia and never really being able to put it off into the reliable time frame. So this is at day 10, 240 hours away. Before you get excited about that sort of chart, you'll want to see it at around 72, 96 hours, because the ECWF has been trying to do this through the winter, and as we know, it's never really pulled it off in terms of these high pressures over Scandinavia. Incidentally, if the wind did get into the east, there is quite a decent cold pool there sitting across eastern parts of Europe, quite a severe cold pool. But I suspect what will actually happen if that does come off is that it'll finish up going down there into the southeast of Europe again, and will remain on the mild side. But let's wait and see. It's 10 days away. It's a long way off. And just need to wait and see what the impacts of this stratospheric warming might be. Finally, just have a look at CFS V2 for next month. These are 500 millibar height anomalies broken down into week periods. The first week period takes us from the 24th through to 30th of January. This one's got high pressure out to the east, low pressure to the west. And this low pressure is gradually, ever so slowly, breaking down that ridge. Week 2 looks much more unsettled. This is the first week of February, 31st of January to 6th of February. Low pressure in the Atlantic is in the ascendancy. The ridge is being forced back into western Russia. So that's much milder, much wetter, and Atlantic driven. Week 3, which is the 7th through to the 13th of February, also looking very unsettled. Low pressures out to the north and west. Got a bit of a ridge down to the south. Just looks essentially Atlantic driven, with the flow coming in from the west. Wet and windy, particularly so for the north and the west. And then we go through to week 4, which is the 14th through 20th of February. Still very similar, but trough is more centred over the UK. This ridge is pushing more towards the east and southeast of Europe. Possibly hints of a little bit of height rises to the north around Greenland, perhaps. So going into the 3rd week of February, maybe signs that we're trying to raise the pressure over Greenland. Again, that might be associated with that stratospheric warming. It would be around the time when expected effect from this stratospheric warming to appear, sometime around mid to late February. But it's a pretty weak signal, really. And overall, I think what we can take from the CFS today is that it's just going for a very big change for February after loads and loads of dry weather through this winter so far. It looks like we get an abrupt shift in February to something much more unsettled, much more Atlantic driven, consequently mild, but also very, very wet potentially through the first half of February. It's probably over the top. But that's how it's looking today. So we'll do it all again tomorrow. Hope you found the video interesting, and thanks very much for watching.